many of us nearly and narrowly escaped death.
A Capitol rioter has been charged with threatening to assassinate Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, before I get to the details of this story, I do want to say that later on in this video, I'm going to play a bit of a bait and a switch here, as I'm going to discuss a separate but related issue. So wait to see what that is. But first here, I want to play a clip of AOC about a week ago discussing, without giving much away, that she feared for her life during the Capitol riots.
I had a very close encounter where I thought I was going to die. It is not an exaggeration to say that many, many members of the House were nearly assassinated. It's just not an exaggeration to say that at all. We were very lucky that things happened within certain minutes that allowed members to escape the House floor unharmed. But many of us nearly and narrowly escaped death.
Now, as I've said before, it is a miracle that more people were not injured or killed during these Capitol riots. And now we know, I mean, to the extent how serious it was. Already there is a number of charges, I think over 80 to 100 charges now of people who were at the riots. Getting into this charge specifically, though, as CNN writes, Garrett Miller of Texas faces 5 criminal charges stemming from the Capitol insurrection, including trespassing offenses and making death threats. Miller allegedly tweeted, quote, "assassinate AOC," end quote, according to court documents. He also said the police officer who fatally shot a Trump supporter during the attack, quote, "deserves to die and won't survive long because it's hunting season," end quote. So you get a little window here into the mindset of some of the people that were at the Capitol riots. This clearly a very serious issue. Watch how his lawyer defends this. Clint Broden, a lawyer for Miller, told CNN Saturday that his client certainly regrets what he did. Quote, "he did it in support of former President Donald Trump, but regrets his actions. He has the support of his family, and a lot of the comments, as viewed in context, are really sort of misguided political hyperbole. Given the political divide these days, there is a lot of hyperbole," Broden said. Threatening to assassinate somebody is not hyperbole. It is a threat to assassinate somebody. The idea of defending these actions by saying it was hyperbole is completely ridiculous. And anybody who threatens somebody, I mean, this guy, it's not like he just tweeted this out. I mean, it's one thing to just tweet it out, and yes, that is still worthy of a charge. But he tweeted this out and flew to Washington, D.C. to be involved in the riots, coming within, I would assume, meters or feet of AOC here. So how is this hyperbole when he was working to play out the very thing that he threatened to do? So glad to see this guy is being charged. But now I'm going to pull a bit of a bait and switch on you, because I want to discuss something semi-related here, which is the Boogaloo Boys. So Boogaloo Boys is, or Boogaloo is sort of this movement that encompasses a number of far-right groups. And now it's been discussed. I don't want to get too deep into, I really try to avoid stupid drama here, but there is somebody that does this work that platformed a member of this far-right fringe group. And before I get to that, let me just give you a quick overview of what the Boogaloo Boys are. So QAnon followers, the Proud Boys, and the far-right and alt-right groups that converged on Washington imagined that they were living out the great fantasy that underlies what many consider to be the Bible of the white nationalism movement. A 1978 dystopian novel, The Turner Diaries by William Luther Pierce, writes Jonathan D. Sarna, a scholar of anti-Semitism at Brandeis University. Quote, "The novel depicts the violent overthrow of the government of the United States, nuclear conflagration, race war, and the ultimate extermination of non-whites and undesirable racial elements among the remaining white population," he explains. This widespread and extremely violent conflagration is often called the Boogaloo by its adherents. So the Boogaloo Boys or the Boogaloo movement isn't necessarily a specific group, but a combination of a number of right-wing groups that are extremely violent, and they've already caused some death and destruction. As it's written here, since 2019, at least 31 people affiliated with the Boogaloo movement have been charged with crimes, including the killings of 2 security and law enforcement officers, a plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, incidents related to the George Floyd protests, and the storming of the U.S. Capitol building. So this is, again, a far-right group made up of a number of far-right groups, a far-right movement that has resulted in death, injury, and destruction. And if you're wondering why they were at the George Floyd protest, they were there defending private property, not there to stand and, work in solidarity in any sort of peaceful way with Black Lives Matter protests. They were simply there to protect private property. Now, I'm going to get to a little more on this and some of the confusion around the affiliation that this group is. But to do that, I have to first start with this. Unfortunately, Jimmy Dore, who I've been on his show before, he's always, on a personal level, I know this does not matter, but on a personal level, we've always had kind interactions. But somebody here who has unfortunately gone off the deep end in this case, especially, he platformed somebody, a member of the Boogaloo Boys, and sold it as a group that we could work with, that the left could work with. Now, as I'm going to read here, even if you believe the guy that he interviewed is all of these things, even if you believe that, they are still not in support of something like, large governmental programs like Medicare for All. This man does not support Medicare for All. The guy in the show did not support Medicare for All. So it doesn't matter if he's these, even if he is these things, it doesn't matter because we don't align on the goals. But tweeting out here says, I interviewed a member of the Boogaloo Boys. I was completely floored when he said he is pro-LGBTQ, pro-Black Lives Matter, anti-police brutality, anti-racism, anti-ICE, anti-war, WTF. Even if you believe he's these things, which I don't, we don't align on the goals, but understand this is how they try to normalize themselves. This is how they try and prevent themselves from getting banned off social media pages, because a lot of their content is outright racist, violent, and incites violence and racism. So it makes total sense strategically for this group to come out and pretend they are pro all of these things as a way to remain existing online and continue to try and build a movement and tap into new audiences that may not know any better. Now, to get a little deeper on this, because I did some research, unlike some people, and I'll link to this below the video. You can read through this whole article. It is a great piece breaking down the Boogaloo Boys and some of the confusion around if they are far right or not. But let me bring up some of the info here. So The Guardian writes, quote, "The way we know the Boogaloo movement is a far-right movement is because they draw a line directly from Waco and Ruby Ridge," said Alex Newhouse, a digital researcher at the Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism at Middlebury Institute for International Studies. Quote, "They hold up things like the McVeigh bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building and the armed response to Ruby Ridge as heroic moments in American history where citizens stood up to government oppression," Newhouse said. Tensions within the movement over supporting Black Lives Matter and pushing out overt white supremacists have been playing out for months, according to the first in-depth profile of the movement from journalists at Bellingcat. Some Boogaloo memes and versions of the movement's flag name Black victims of police violence, including Oscar Grant and Breonna Taylor, among the movement's martyrs. At the same time, some of the recent pro-Black Lives Matter statements on Boogaloo pages may have been motivated by group administrators' desire to avoid a crackdown from Facebook moderators, Newhouse said. Other experts say the lip service from some Boogaloo supporters about wanting to be a multiracial movement should not be taken seriously. The idea that you would dismantle the U.S. government at this stage is to undo the protections that have been granted to Black people, queer people, disabled people to stop foreign policy related to immigration, Donovan said. There are always racialized and eugenic sub-themes in these groups. That's what war is. At its base, it's about who should live. While some anarchists have embraced Boogaloo rhetoric, these are primarily right-wing anarchists who believe in unfettered capitalism, not left-wing anarchists, said Mark Pitcavage, a researcher at the Anti-Defamation League's Center on Extremism. On the ground, experts said there's really no way to figure out in real time if an unknown man in a Hawaiian shirt is a neo-Nazi looking to start a race war or an anti-police libertarian who sincerely believes that he is not a racist. Asking Boogaloo Boys about their beliefs directly is unlikely to clarify much, since neo-Nazis and white nationalists routinely lie and claim not to be racist. This should be obvious, but apparently this flew over the head of some people. You cannot trust a group like this. The idea of working hand in hand with a far-right racist group, even if there are members that actually believe they are not racist, overall, what the group has done, what they fight for, the people that make up the group, what they have said largely is far-right extremist. Now, all of this really shouldn't have to be said, honestly. This should be obvious. If you just do a little research, a little reading, you would understand all of this. But unfortunately, some people that do this work do their research on the fly and don't bother to actually research the guests they're going to have on and platform. And it's really disappointing. And just to get back to the initial story here, this is what ultimately, leads to this sort of action. Is you have these far right groups that feel emboldened that can relate to others who have similar views that they do, and you end up having these threats on lawmakers' lives, and really not just lawmakers, but threats in general to anybody who is in their way, as ultimately their goal is to dismantle government, not give healthcare to people, but to dismantle government in the name of white supremacy.